that was performed by a group called Disturb. A group called Disturb.
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 I know it really was. Pretty good for a 50-year-old song, huh?
Yeah, was it that old?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was a senior in high school, 67.
Okay, no, wow, that's fine. As you might have guessed from the song, the point of today's talk is around silence. And there were features of the song that seemed really significant in light of what has brought us to here. Yesterday, Stephanie led us through that beautiful visualization board practice, and she punctuated it with the process of visioning. And the song, The Sounds of Silence, it talks about the capacity to vision. But it also talks about so many things that come along that sweep our visions out of mind. It talks about how we can find ourselves in a state where we're talking, but we're not really even aware of what it is that we say. Where we hear people, but we're not in a state to really listen to them. I've heard it said that what people most long for is to just be heard. I know that if Tane were here, that's a fundamental element of any good psychotherapy or any good counseling experience. Anything that a practitioner does is, it's that space of really hearing a person, really listening to them and knowing. In that shared space, there need be no commentary, there need be no explanations, but there's a field that gets created where a person maybe for the first time hears themselves and hears their own story. So why listening? Well, I was kind of manipulative about this. I picked a reading and gave it to Mykal because I wanted to draw in the notion of this season of winter, this movement into winter, as this movement potentially into silence and the spiritual practice that silence can afford us. But in speaking today, I also wanted to give us a little bit of a relief, because I think that sometimes people can think about silence, or they can think about meditation, or they can think about spiritual practices, and it can become very overwhelming. Has anyone ever been overwhelmed by what should be happening with respect to spiritual practices? What should be happening with the work that we're engaged in? What should be happening with the way that we're living? I might be the only one here, but I have let a lot of my life been driven by those shoulds. Silence is one of the most beautiful ways to lighten up that heaviness of shoulds. Silence is not something that is all that difficult if we let it be more easy. Silence may be the moment that happens between the beats in a song. Pamela, as a singer, you know full well that there are moments when you very deliberately don't sing a thing. There are times in that jazz group that you're with that others are not playing. One person comes forward and plays. But in that act of playing, the plays are punctuated by those moments of silence. We wouldn't have melodies, we wouldn't have music if it weren't for the silence. The notes happen on the silence. And I just invite us to consider that metaphor, how sometimes we think, oh, to be silent, I have to do all of these things. There's a lot of work involved in becoming silent. And what I'm wanting people to realize is that silence can be as easy as turning on the radio and listening for those spaces. That the way we commit to silence can vary depending on who we are and how we are at any given moment in time. Pamela may remember this. I know Mykal and I remember this. There was a time during ministerial school where one of the assignments was to do a silent retreat. And it was funny because for a number of the ministerial students with whom we were with, that silent retreat was like the last thing that people would wait for. It's like, okay, I've got my checklist of what is it that I have to do. And the silent retreat, it was on the checklist, so it's not like it had a spot, number 75 and number 76, you're done. But for many people, that silent retreat ended up being towards the end. And part of it was that in ministerial school, it was about how do I learn to speak this God language in a way that isn't just all woo-woo, gaudy sounding. How do I proclaim the word in a way that is engaging with anyone I meet, anywhere I meet them? How do I be present to them? So there was a lot in ministerial school about becoming very skilled at speaking. And that silent retreat would often wait till the end because it seemed like there's so much stuff we've got to cram for. So much stuff that we've got to get mastered. Some of us may be apprehensive about silence because I suspect that maybe for more than just me, there was a discipline as a child that when I had done something bad or wrong, if I wasn't going to get spanked or whipped or something for it, then I had to go to my room and think in silence. It wasn't like I could go there and be celebrating, having a happy time. It was, I needed to reflect, and reflection required a silent reflection. And any noises that were accompanying my silent reflection were quickly described as being, to stop it. And again, I'm hearing some chuckles, so it sounds like there may have been others that were.
I'm gonna just be that.
Okay, so it's just your name. Okay, so silence can have a negative connotation. One of the things that is very common nowadays, they're really looking at the impact of screen time on students and on children. I think it's for many of us, the iPod I use actually has a way of now tracking how much screen time I had. And it was a little disturbing because I thought, I'm not really on the screen that much, but I was like, oh my God, I'm on the screen that much? So there's ways that this captures us. And oftentimes, screen time is not silent time. So there's little buzzing, little noises, little things that go on with it. If there are games, there's always some kind of like, or characters are talking, or that sort of thing. But there's always this sound. So this time of winter can be a time where we consciously step forward into the silence. And I want to talk about two elements of silence. I want to talk about creating silence in and of and for ourselves. How do we do that? How do we just take the time to not have anything rattling at us, prattling at us, conveying itself to us? One of the things that I do every morning, I try to run up and down the stairs at home as a way to exercise, as a way to get my day started. And over the past several weeks, I've been doing it so that there's nothing on in the background. There's just going up and down the stairs. And part of it was, if it's louder, then Mykal's downstairs, and I don't want to be running down with my speaker on or on my phone and on the radio. And I don't really want to wear headphones. So just going up and down the stairs in that place of silence. Sometimes the silence is just, turning on the TV, but then walking away from it. When there's all those commercials, creating a silent space for myself, saying, "Hey, this commercial is going to be my silent time." I don't have to take that in. I don't have to be brainwashed about something that I desperately didn't know that I needed. And with enough speaking, it's like, oh, I guess I do need that. One of the things, there are Christmas songs that characterize it. Christmas has become this time of just enormous gift buying. And as if that wasn't bad enough, it's also now the time of, you've done all this for others, so you should get yourself something too.
Yeah.
Make sure you include yourself in your gift giving, because it'd be terrible to neglect yourself. So they're able to completely capitalize on that notion of and we've got all these bargains, so you might as well take advantage of these bargains, which won't add up all that much on the credit card you're using for these purchases. There's a song, one of the Christmas songs about the presents on the tree. Oh. And Mykal was saying this morning, who puts presents on the tree? And I was saying that song was historically what used to happen. We didn't get these boxes that were, the size of a big screen TV, and not every box was a bicycle. Not every box was some enormous gift. Some of the gifts were small, and you put it on the tree. You didn't put it under the tree, you put it on the tree, because it was a gesture of love. It was a gesture of gratitude. It was a gesture. It wasn't that what has happened for many people, the checklist of the 105 things that I want most for this holiday, only to be followed by the 105 things that I want for Martin Luther King Day, and for President's Day, and then you can't forget Valentine's Day, and you can't forget Easter, my goodness, and then you can't forget Memorial Day, and you can't forget July 4th, all of these sales that punctuate our lives. And then there's that middle of the year, summer Black Friday.
Oh,
Yeah.
what?
There's summer Black Friday.
Black Friday comes early.
Black Friday. There's a Black Friday in June, because we've got to have this centrifugal force of sales at all times of the year. It's if we look at it, we are so inculcated in the notion of consuming. I find it kind of ironic that there's been this discussion about how Christmas was taken away from people. That there was a fear about saying Merry Christmas, and that there was something, that there was this oppression against Merry Christmas. I would argue that there's really an oppression from all of this consumerism. There's an oppression that if we are not buying those 105 things for our second cousin twice removed, we're not a good person. If we're neglecting ourselves of any of those material things that we didn't know we needed, but now we've seen it and now we know that we need it, we have come into a time where the voices are so loud, and that's what was in the song. There's 10,000 people, maybe more. Do we ever feel, as this season is happening, that you can go anywhere, that there isn't just this onslaught of people? I mean, it's difficult to even just go in the grocery store without there being a line of many people in front of us. So, I would say that silence is a balm for us in the midst of this pressure that is happening increasingly in our society. That the silence is as close as just stopping, breathing in, that in that held breath, is silence. In that pause, in that place where our heart beats a little slower, there's a silence. And we're physically equipped for this. We're designed to have this experience of silence that is within us, that we get to be a place and a presence of silence. So as we are targeted for those 105 things to go out and purchase, a spiritual practice may be just taking that breath in, holding it, letting it out, and just holding ourselves empty for a moment. What does that feel like in the place of that urgent messaging that we receive? The other thing about the season is that literally, wintertime becomes a time where physically in the world, it's just more quiet. You don't go outside and hear the bird song. When I get up early in the morning during the spring, summer, and fall, there are birds at it from a very, very early hour.
Oh, yes.
You know, when Mykal and I went to Hawaii several years ago, Kauai, there was a hurricane and a bunch of chickens that were bound in for Hawaii. They did not make it on the ship. They crashed and their cages and they got out. So Kauai is like this chicken paradise. If anybody's ever seen the movie Chicken Run, Kauai is really like Chicken Run because they actually have a rule. You're not supposed to like chase and catch and kill the chickens. So there is this island full, so it may be harder. If you're on Kauai, you have an excuse to say, I'm having a hard time finding silence, because those chickens are loud at all hours of the day or night. The idea that roosters only crow at dawn. That was a clever story that they told people. Roosters crow whenever they like. Oh, it's the middle of the night, it's 2 a.m. I think it's time. It's 2 a.m. and 1 minute. It's time. If you've ever had a neighbor, we have, who had a rooster,
Terrible.
it does create minimally it creates a longing for silence. Where, oh where can my silence be found? But this season offers us that silence. Even if the wind is blowing, there's a time that it stops. And when it stops, we have that silence available to us. So I'm basically inviting two things with the silence. I'm inviting us to be aware of, when do we create silence in ourselves? When might we create this silence in ourselves? And the second thing to look for is, when can I find silence in my world? Do I have to go out to a park? Is that the place where it will happen? It's harder in a city to find silence, but even in a city, late at night, there's a greater opportunity for silence. I want you to use your imagination for a moment. So, I've got a big glass vase here. I was going to do this, but then I thought, I can really want to bring in the mess. So, there's a big glass vase, and it is filled with murky water. I'm having us imagine this because I think that sometimes I can identify with that vase full of murky water. I can just take in so much stuff and I just don't feel clean anymore. I just feel that I am overburdened. We had a speaker come to the school psychologist, and she was talking with us about secondary trauma. If you work with traumatized people, it doesn't just pass on by. Many of us have encountered people who have experienced trauma. And we may not even be aware of the impact on us. I can imagine, anybody ever have a friend that when the phone rings and you see their name on the phone, you have to make a decision, a very deliberate decision. Am I going to answer this? Or am I going to just let it ring and go to voicemail?
Or hit decline.
What?
Or hit decline.
So that's the option too. I say that image of the dirty water because sometimes, you have that conversation with the person and you're just like, yeah, and you may not even need to say anything because they're just needing to let you hear it. And, sometimes there may be even people that you're like, oh, I really have to go. I've got it. Yeah, I'll let you go. But they just keep talking. And it's like, I have an appointment. And essentially, finally, you have to say, it's like, would you call me and scream that it's dinner time or something? That we need to have another person so that we can gracefully try to excuse ourselves from it. Because I don't know about you, but I'm apprehensive to hang up on almost anybody. And particularly when somebody is in that state of such need, you don't want to be like, oh, lovely talking with you, click.
Why not?
Well, so we, as the listeners, if we've listened, we cannot help but be touched by that, and have our own spirits, our own souls, our own physical bodies impacted by that. How do we give ourselves space so that we can clear out? If we're that vase full of murky water, do we have any room to take anything in?
You don't want to stir it up.
No, you don't want to stir it up. No. So one of the other practices is, how do we just empty that out? The only way for that vase, the only way for ourselves to be refilled is to let ourselves be emptied. Winter is a perfect time about emptying. It's a time when there doesn't appear to be as much life going on around us. So how can we lean into the season to embody some of what it has to share with us? I've told you this before about the story of how they catch monkeys. That they put the banana in the cage, and the little monkey puts its hand in the cage and puts the hand on the banana, and then can't get out of the box because they won't let go of the banana in the box. So, and their hand won't get out as long as it's held with the banana. How many of us find that we have grappled something and we just won't let it go, and so we are trapped in that monkey cage? I'm seeing some nods. So silence can remind us, I can let go of the banana. This is not the only banana, and it's really probably not even a very good banana for me when there's this cage that is holding me back. I was thinking about this earlier when I was talking with Charlie. We can get into habits where it's so hard to break. We can get into ideas and patterns and beliefs. You may all know that the way that they train an elephant is when it was little, they chain the little elephant. They chain its leg. And the little elephant learns that it can't move because it's chained and it hurts to move its leg. So that's how they trained the elephant. So when it's a big giant elephant and the elephant could really literally just go this and pull the stake up, the elephant has been so trained into what to do.
Sounds like the Catholic Church.
Well, I think it sounds like a lot of practices. I think there are many places where we have been taught at an early age a certain way to be. I mean, that notion of having our vases, it's very hard to say, I'm going to empty it out. How many of us feel like we're truly free to just empty it out? I mean, that was one of the points of the silent retreat. It's like, how do I make the space that I recognize I don't need to hold on to that all anymore? How do we become humane society for the elephant and start to remediate and teach it? You know what? You're strong enough to be able to pull your leg and lift out that stake. How many of us have been staked down by old beliefs? Let the silence help us break those old lessons, those old beliefs. Again, in the song, The Sounds of Silence, there are words that are available, and there's space in between those words. Hear me, that I might teach you. What if within us there is that which says, hear me, that I might teach you? In the story I told about the prophet, he was warned that the divine was going to be present. How often do we let ourselves be fooled into thinking that it is that heavy wind, that beating notion? How often do we think that that's how the divine is going to show up? And if it's not like that, then it's going to show up as an earthquake, or it's going to show up as it's going to show up as a fire. It's going to show up as this storm. What if we simply recognize, like the prophet did, that the divine can show up in absolute silence? That we don't need anything raging at us. That we don't need anything shaking us to our boots. That all of that may precede the divine that is coming. I mean, sometimes we try to tell ourselves, there's good in this. There's terrible health condition, there's good in this. And then the worst side in terms of religious science. What did I have in my consciousness that created this? How did I, and then let's go inward and now examine our navels for the next 10 days about what in my consciousness created this. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we live in a co-constructed world. And that one of the things that religious science can promote is the idea that we create everything in our world. I think that that's a little bit egotistical. We create our response to everything in the world. But we don't create everything that happens. And we have to start thinking about how our silence may perpetuate terrible things in the world. I, as a white man, have to be very conscious of how do I, using my power and my privilege, interrupt? How do I disrupt a process that allows black men, brown men, to be inequitably treated? black women, brown women to be inequitably treated. That a woman could be dragged from her car and die in prison, having committed no offense while driving. But a cop stopped her, and she had the gall to ask him, "Why are you stopping me?" And the response that I have uninhibited right to do whatever I want. And then she ends up dead in prison. From that space of silence, we may have the courage to disrupt. We may have the courage to interrupt. We may have the courage to say, "Stop it. No more." I would actually add that if we're in a position of privilege, we have an obligation. We can't just let ourselves float on by and say, "It really doesn't affect me." There was a song that's based on a scriptural passage. "Whatsoever you do to the least of my brother, that you do unto me. When I was hungry, you gave me some food. When I was thirsty, you gave me some drink. Now enter into the home of the Spirit." We are here for each other. Let us bravely be the silence when that's needed. Let us bravely be the silence for ourselves as our bottle is getting full. That when that name comes up on the phone, that we are consciously thinking, do I have the 52 minutes that this conversation is going to require? If I don't, but I spend the whole time on the phone resentful that this person is talking, then we have not created a space. This person may still benefit from us with those 52 minutes, but we haven't added grace to the world. Because we get off the phone and we're like, so we haven't created a space of the silence. So dare to be silent. Dare to listen for the silence. And out of that silence, find the strength to disrupt, to interrupt, to say, there's a better way.